Hi everyone and welcome to the first video on Season 3. Yes, an anthology. Aptly my first video because there's a lot to catch up with. My hiatus from, putting out video content over Christmas and getting this up and running means that there's quite a few games that I need to actually talk about. There are some single reviews coming. The Gugon is going to be a single review done by, on behalf of Zatu Games. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff, both expansions, both big games, both small games, that just need to be talked about. So I'm going to try and get as many as I can done in this video. And if there's any left over, I'll do them in another anthology later in January. So without further ado, let's crack on. Basically, as I say, the video format for this is here's a bunch of games, and I talk for roughly 3 to 5 minutes on each one, just giving an overview of what I think about it, and just giving my thoughts on the matter. So let's start off with, lots of games. We're going to start off with Catan, Rise of the Incas. This is another Catan game, and yes, if you're fed up with Catan, then you can skip ahead a few minutes. But this is a standalone Catan set that has you building up settlements and cities as before, except you're doing it with Incan tribes. And the main difference here, and there's not that many differences, is that you have to get to a certain victory point threshold, and then everything you've built up goes into decline. You put these little, they look like little mini tumbleweeds, but you put these thicket plastic bits over your settlements and cities, and they will produce for you, sorry, but they will not you can't use them, you can't build through them and stuff like that. And other players can build over them. So this can be quite a cutthroat version of Catan, where people are outright building over your previous stuff. When you reach a second victory point threshold, they go into decline, all your previous stuff and figures gets wiped off the board, and then you have to get to a third threshold before you win the game. Other than that, there's not a lot of difference here. You still have your standard hexes, you still have some special resources that are just used to trade in for more normal resources. You still have the trading. Mainly, the main thing that's different is just simply the victory point thresholds and the whole going into decline thing. Is that enough to make this a worthy purchase? Not entirely. I mean, first off, production quality has never been great with the Catan games. There's always been some cheapness, and here it's kind of no different. The artwork on the tiles is only really average at best. The little plastic pieces, at first they look good, but when you look up close and personal with those settlements and cities, they're really pretty cheap and tacky and nasty. They're not particularly good at all. But the main issue with this game is just there's not a lot of interesting stuff in it. Firstly, you have your normal hexes on the board that generate you the wheat, the sheep, and all that lot. But then those special resources, fish, feathers, and I've forgotten the other one. They're so generic it doesn't matter. They are literally there purely so that you can trade a combination of them or two of the same for normal resources. That's it. That is their whole role in the game. That is not interesting at all. They couldn't have differentiated abilities or other little benefits. No, it is purely just cash some of them in, get a wood. That's all they do. There's 3 different ones, and it makes no difference apart from the fact that if you cash in a set of all 3, it gets you slightly more. That's really not exactly innovating, reinventing the envelope here for putting something different in this. Secondly, that cutthroatness of it. If you don't like cutthroat levels of Catan, don't play this. Because having people just literally build over your stuff can really set you back. And if you're not careful with your third settlement placement, the rulebook even makes clear that you need to be really careful about your third settlement placement, you can easily get blocked into a corner and basically just taken out of the running. It's not that fun to do. And the fact that you've gone into decline means that you're kind of like, I've built up this cool stuff, and then build up this cool stuff, and then you sort of revert back artificially. So it just didn't really sing to me that much. I mean, I like Catan. I still have 2 Catans there. I still like it, but I feel that this is I think we're done with these standalone expansions. I mean, does anybody remember the Egypt one? Does anybody play the Game of Thrones one? I don't think anybody's really going to care about this either. I like Catan, but can we just stick with what we have? Maybe just bring out new versions of them and up the production quality. You know, let's have a 5th edition, was it 5th or 6th, I don't forget. Let's have a new edition of the normal Catan stuff without all that rubbish 5-6 player stuff and just up the production quality. You know, does Asmodee own this lot now? You know, bring out a really nice shiny version of the original style of Catan. Just enough with these. They're not as good anymore, you know, they're not as interesting. Scenario packs are good, you know, the scenario pack for the Seafarers one was alright. You know, give me another one of those, but just up the quality of it. It's just, there's not really anything here to make it, like, worthy of a purchase. If you're going to get Catan, you might as well get one of the normal ones, but I just think the standalone ones are kind of, they're dumb. I can't really recommend this one. Next up, very quickly, we're going to talk about a big Euro, and this is a, shall we say, not a new game, but there's a new edition of it. Kanban. I have already done, I think, a written review on Kanban in the past, and it's no surprise to anybody who's watched my channel, I love this Euro. This has been in my top 100 every single year. I love it. The theme, it just drips off it. It's an interesting theme, you know, building up cars, working in the car factory and dodging your boss. But, you know, for those not actually affiliated with Kanban, it is a heavy Euro sort of worker placement action selection game where you're designing and building cars. You get the blueprints, you get the parts you need, you go and put them on the assembly line, and then you test them out. There's different departments on the board where if you put your worker in there, they use up a certain amount of time. Imagine that you're on a shift and you basically do the various actions. And you're trying to meet objective goals and get victory points while also dodging the boss. Or trying to hunt them down, it depends. You can either play with Sandra, your boss, in nice or mean mode. I prefer mean mode, personally. But basically, nice mode is where, when she's in the same department as you, she marks you on a scale, and if you've met the criteria, you get more points. The mean version is if she's in your department and you haven't met the criteria, she penalises you points. I know that sounds more cutthroat, which is not more punishing, which is not usually my style, but I just think theme-wise, it's more interesting to have this boss that you're trying to actively avoid. It's, you know, you can sort of predict where she's going to go, but not entirely, because players might go on certain spaces and she might jump over them. It's a little bit hard to get to grips with in your first game because the rulebook is not perfect. You know, the designer, Vital Lacerda, put up a geek list on Board Game Geek where he went over the rules in a bit better detail, and some people out there have done YouTube videos on the subject, so I recommend you check some of those out as well. But if you take your time with the rulebook, you will eventually get to grips with it. But just know that it's a heavy game, and it's one of the earlier ones that Vital Lacerda did, which means it's not quite as streamlined as maybe some of the other ones like the Gallerist, for example. But as a Euro, it is great fun. I love the theme and how engaging that your choices are. Everything matters, and everybody just gets into it. Now, what's the whole point of this driver's edition? Well, basically, it's a re-release. So it's a slightly different cover, but not very much. And it's annoyingly the same size box, more on that. But pretty much there's very few differences. One, they have basically, as I can see on the back here, put in some new sculpts for the wooden cars to differentiate them between the different players and different types of colours. Great. It's a cosmetic upgrade, nothing more. They've also put a second board on the flip, so it's a double-sided board, one which is the normal layout, and one which is kind of like a muted, almost black and white style, but not quite. But it's, in a sense, a grayscale type of board where it's easier to differentiate the different departments where you can put things in. It's designed to make the board look a little less busy and make it a little bit easier for new players to try out. Personally, it doesn't make it that much easier. If you can handle that, you can pretty much handle the colour one, I think. And the colour version just looks better. You know, all we've said and done. And the third change, which is a welcome change. It was needed, but I feel, for me, it's a little bit redundant. The nice Sandra, I didn't want to play mainly because it was broken in the original version. It was far too easy to exploit the nice version of Sandra so that you could just gain so many points from her that you didn't really need to care about doing the actual car building. So I always played with mean Sandra. The rules have been slightly tweaked in this in order to cap how much you get and also just to sort of balance it out. Great. It now means that if you play Nice or Mean Sandra with this version, then it's more balanced. You can pick one that is to your liking. But you can get that rule online. You don't need to buy this edition just for that rule. You could house rule it into your current game and it's an easy include. So really, the only reason that you would want to buy this, if you already own the original, is if your box is getting frayed at the sides or something, and you're really desperate for that double-sided board or the unique wooden sculpts. Apart from that, there isn't much reason to buy this if you have the original. I got this as a review copy, and that's the only reason I got it. Because money-wise, it's too much to spend just for 3 minor changes. However, this is a limited release, so it's not going to be in print forever, but if you can find a copy of this, and you haven't played Kanban, highly recommend it if you like heavy Euros, because if you like heavy thematic Euros, this is definitely one to try out. This was my introduction to Vital Lacerda, and now, as you can see, I have kind of a thing for his games. So, definitely love it. If you haven't got it already, recommend it. If you have got it already, maybe save your money, or if you've just got money to spend, fine. But I don't think there's enough value in this edition for you to go say, oh yeah, my old version's there, but you know what, I want this slightly nicer version. That's pretty much it, because certain things have not changed. For starters, box size is not big enough. If you want to put like Plano boxes or something fancy in here, you're kind of limited on space. Why couldn't it have just been the same size as a normal box? And secondly, the rulebook hasn't been updated. Literally, the only difference on the rulebook is the title. Really? We have complained enough that the rulebook is not perfect in this game. This was the perfect opportunity to give you a 2.0 revised rulebook, and they didn't do it. Shame on you, Stronghold Games. Shame on you. But those little quibbles aside, brilliant, excellent Euro game. Next up, Spell Smashers. Spell Smashers is a new title from Renegade Games, and it's a fantasy setting where you are defeating monsters that are invading the town. And the idea of how you do it is by spelling words. Wait, what? Yeah, it's an interesting little, almost like deck building. Well, it's not even deck building. It's a hand management game where you're collecting cards with letters on them, different letters, and you're spelling words, almost like, the old Nightmare TV series. And each letter has its own type of damage and how much damage it does. So, an S might do 1 fire damage, an L might do 2 water damage. And you have these monsters available, each with their own amount of hit points, which is basically money. You deal damage, you get the money. And, their maximum health, so you can kill them off. And if you do so, you get their monster trophy, which is another letter that you can use in your words. And basically, you are going through the rounds. I think there's only about 6 or 7 in the game, where you will spell out these words, deal as much damage as you can, kill off as many monsters as you can, and then at the end of the round, shop around the town, which is on a separate board, to buy potions, elixirs, get new gear, more armor, more weapons, go to the bar and boast about your killings to get some more points, heal your wounds, and stuff like that. It's a nice, lightish fantasy-style game. I mean, the theme could be most things, but I like the way that there's some things that this game's got going for it. Firstly, it looks gorgeous. It's, very nice artwork. The board looks really good. It's nice and colourful. Definitely one that pops on the table. The second thing I really like is there's a solo mode in this, which is very different from the normal game. You can play this with up to 4 players, although I kind of recommend you keep it as low as possible because there's not much player interaction in this game apart from initiative order, and that's all well and good. Basically, the longer the word you spell, the more damage you'll do, but the shorter the word you do... Sorry, is it the shorter? No, the longer the word, the better you are in initiative. You'll do more damage, it's harder to spell those words, but it's a cool little mechanic. But, there's only so much that helps, and it obviously drags the game out more if you're waiting for someone to hurry up and spell a word. But the solo mode is just generally, the monsters are attacking your city, your city's got health points, locations can get blown up, and you're trying to fend them off for a certain amount of time. Very different to how the normal game plays, but it's also a very cool solo mode. Fairly simple, but it gets you practicing spelling out words, it's easy to set up, easy to play, and it's pretty enjoyable. It's nice that the solo mode is not just simply play the multiplayer with one person. some games fall into that trap. This one is different, and I like it for doing so. The other thing I really like is that this isn't a deck building game. So there isn't so much a luck mitigation of, the cards that you've got. If you've got wounds, then they're going to be in your hand, and you have a hand size limit. So you're not going to be spelling out 12-letter words on a regular basis, but wounds clog up your hand. But it's not like a deck builder where you get all these letters, put them into a deck, and then you randomly may or may not get the letters you want. No, you have access to the letters you want. If you want to spell out the same word every single round, you can, depending if it's a good word or not. But of course, the monsters deal you damage, you've got to heal those wounds somehow, and the more wounds you have, the more painful letters you have, because wounds are not deadwood, they're just not particularly good letters, or not particularly high damage. So you want to get rid of them eventually, but do you wait until you've got a whole stack of wounds and then go and heal? Or do you go to the bar first and boast about, oh yeah, that dragon ripped me a new one there across the chest, get some victory points, and then go and heal? So there's some interesting choices that you've got to make, and I like that it just gives you the flexibility to spell out the words that you want to spell out, whilst also having the initiative order being important for how long you want your word to be. It's like, I really want to go second this round because I don't think I can kill anything, so I want somebody to deal some damage first, and then maybe I'll jump in and get the killing blow. But then on top of that, you might be thinking, well, I really need to go first, but this short word will give me lots of damage where I want it. But I need to get another 2 letters, otherwise I'm not going to go first, they're going to go first. So it's like, some cool choices to make, and I think this is going to fall under the radar for a lot of people, because word games don't tend to do as well. But I think that if you're into word games and you want something just a bit different, give Spell Smashers a look. That should be on a blooper reel. But, give this one a look. It's an interesting word game that just sets itself differently from the rest. Next on the list, we have a pretty big release here. And, well, I say big release. It's big in the way of a box. But I don't think it's getting that much buzz. And that is Gen 7. This is a new Plaid Hat Games release, which is supposed to follow on from Dead of Winter with the Crossroad system. We were crying out for an Aliens-style Crossroad system for ages, and they never wanted to cough one up. Well, they have now, although it's not entirely aliens, but it's basically set in space. Think Passengers, the film with, I think, was it Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence? Was it Chris Pratt or Chris Pine? I can't remember. But basically one of those two guys and Jennifer Lawrence, that film where they're in space and, they come out of cryo and there's loads of people, like the next evolution of humanity, and you've got to get them safely to their destination. That's pretty much what this is. You are the 7th generation in, operating this ship that's going to a new home. You will never see the new home. You have not even seen your old home. You're just basically there to keep things in check. Now, I can't say too much about this game because it will spoil the plot, but basically, if you've played games like Fuse, it's essentially you've got a bunch of boards and you're using dice on the various boards in order to perform tasks like repair this, maintain this, general ship running maintenance. But as you play, you have the Crossroads deck, which, like in Dead of Winter, if certain things happen, you read out the text and stories will start to evolve between the characters. Can you trust some people? Can you not? And it sounds really cool. It's not perfect, though. I'm not saying this is bad, but there's some things that it has problems with. Firstly, the plots seem to kind of be guided by what you do. There were a lot of occasions where I felt like, I think, as an example, I think so-and-so is a bad person and shouldn't be trusted. If you act that way to them, they tend to end up like that. It's kind of, you're almost guiding the plot yourself, so you don't feel like you're getting a lot of surprises. Although there are 1 or 2 surprises that it throws at you, some of them that are pretty interesting. One that is kind of like, seriously, you shoehorned that into this game. There are some bits like that. The second thing is that this is a campaign game. I think you play, I forget how many did we play? I think it was 6 or 7. I think it's 7. But you're in this campaign for the lot. You play the intro mission, which isn't really that interesting. It just teaches you a bit of how to play it. But to be honest, Rodney Smith has done a Watch It Played video for this. You might as well check that one out first before you jump in. but it gets you into the swing of it. But people aren't going to want to play the first scenario to this as a standalone game. There's just not enough going on in it. The meat doesn't really start frying in the pan, weird metaphor, but doesn't really start sizzling until game 2 onwards. The problem is, you need to really play through the whole campaign. You can't just choose, you know what, scenario 4, let's just play that as a random one-off. No, you have to commit yourself to this. So you need the same group. You need the same, time. You need to be able to preferably do it within a short space of time, not drag it out throughout the entire year. And I don't think people are that comfortable with that, I like to be able to just go, you know what, I just feel like playing Lowlands for a night. I'll just put it out straight away into a game. And there are other sort of campaign-style games, not many. Some are, a little bit harder to do, but where they'll give you like several narrative stories, but you can usually pick out one story and do it on its own as a standalone experience, and that's good fun. If you want to play it as a campaign, great, but I like that option. Here, you don't get that. Another negative is that the look of the game is not particularly interesting. I mean, there's some colour, but a lot of it just looks a bit bland on the table. It does look pretty sterile, and there's a lot of text. There's iconography on the various boards and that, but there's a fair amount to read as well. And it can get a little bit overwhelming at first. I mean, when you first open the box and get everything there out, you're like, what are we doing here? So like I say, watch Rodney's video to get more information. But it's not... The biggest issue is the value. A lot of this comes down to the value. I talk a lot about whether games justify their cost. This is not a cheap game. I mean, you are paying premium levels of money for this game, whether you're in the UK or America or whatever. And I can't see where that money's going. It's certainly not going into the artwork, I don't think. I mean, the front of the box is okay, but it makes you think it's more like a TV broadcast system than it is like a space station. And, there's only so many cards. There's a lot of space in this box. Even with the sealed envelopes that you open up as the thing progresses, there's still a lot of space. I just, nothing's of particularly premium quality. The dice are okay, the cards are okay, but they just look a bit bland and sterile. So I don't know where the value has gone into this. And I don't think it kind of justifies the cost for what you are getting. I mean, you'll play this, you can play this over and again, you don't have to stick to one campaign, because different choices, different Crossroad cards. So this does have replay value, but again, you've got to find a group of people that want to commit for the 7 games that you need. And it's just, I think that's going to be a problem for a lot of people. So all in all, this was an enjoyable experience. But I think that the value and the commitment and the look of the game is going to put a lot of people off. So I think that you should be wary before you jump straight into this thinking this is going to be like the next Dead of Winter, because it's very different from Dead of Winter. That's a whole different game compared to this. They've just nicked the Crossroad system, and that's about it. The setting is a bit more interesting, but again, I don't think it's strong enough to warrant like multiple plays constantly, because you feel that you've kind of guided some of the outcomes. It's like I say, it's not bad, but I think it's not great either. I feel that this is something that is a good starting point. Can we develop this a little bit more? Can we work in some standalone methods and that? And then we can create like the perfect package for this. But I'm not sure this is the perfect package I wanted. And so, I think give it a try. But don't go ape about like, oh, I must buy this now, Try and get it when it's come down a bit in value. I have no qualms that sooner or later it's going to go on sale in a few places. But if someone else has got a copy, then by all means, share the cost out between the group, and perhaps it will work out better that way. Next up we have Solenia. Solenia is this is going to fly under the radar for a lot of people, but I think you should give this a try. It's from Pearl Games, and Pearl Games are known for doing things like Deus. Again, another underrated title. Pearl Games seem to do some interesting stuff that not many people have heard about. And so, I feel this one's going to go down the same route. But the games they do are generally really good. They're different. They introduce interesting mechanics, and they may not be the best lookers ever, but they do a good job. Although saying that, looks-wise, Solenia does a pretty good job. You are essentially on a little airship flying across the world, and you're trying to make deliveries to various castles. Now, you're collecting resources and delivering them to the various floating islands that need them. The really cool I don't want to say gimmick, but the cool thing with this is that the map you fly on, as you play the cards, some of them will move the ship. And when it does, you take the back tile off this map and then you flip it over and put it at the front. So it looks like, as the map progresses, that day and night changes between themselves, and it looks really cool. It's a really innovative way to do a scrolling map, and kudos to the designers of this for managing to do that, because it looks cool when you're doing it. As for the mechanics of the game, they're generally pretty simple. You are playing cards on the various spaces, and you're restricted on where you can play them based on where the ship is and where your other cards are. Placing them on the various resource bits basically gets you the resource. You've got storage on your ship, but it's limited, and the islands want different combinations of resources for victory points. Pretty standard affair there. But on top of that, you also have they've got little portholes in the cards, which I really like, which when you put the card down, you can see through the porthole what resource you're going to get. That's a really cool, addition. I wish more games did that just in general, because it makes it easier to read what was on the board. But it's a nice thematic touch, and I like it when games do that. But when these when these cards fall off the back of the map, they trigger an extra bonus for you. So you're thinking, well, if I put this card at the front, I can quickly get to that castle I need or get that resource, but it's going to be ages before that card falls off. Maybe I want to try and grab something that's at the back of the map. That way, in a turn or two, hopefully it will fall off the map and I'll get this other cool bonus. Question is, when's that going to happen? Is it going to happen sooner rather than later? Do I need it urgently, or do I just take it as a nice cool bonus? There's a lot of interesting tactical choices to make in this game, and it's not complicated. It's not even a long game, 30 to 45 minutes. 45 minutes is actually pretty accurate. It should not take you any more than an hour, even with slow people on your first game, but it's quick, it's smooth. My only quibble with this is that, as simple and as light as the game is, I'm not sure that this is one that I'm going to want to play again and again and again, because it is mainly just collect resources, dump them on a place, and get victory points. You can flip the tiles over to their B side, like your ship and that, where you can make certain orders at day and night and get special bonuses or abilities. That's pretty cool, and I recommend that you throw those additions in as soon as you can, rather than just playing the basic game. But it's a neat concept. It looks pretty. The artwork is Vincent Dutrait, so it looks gorgeous with the day and night and that. The whole flipping the map is really innovative and different. So I think you should give this a try. If you want something that's maybe a step above Gateway level, it's not Gateway at all, but it's the next step. It's kind of like Takinoko level, but you want something different. Something that just looks nice on the table, that has, a theme that people can get behind, even though the theme is not that strong within it. But it just looks good. It's got wooden pieces, you've got the gorgeous artwork, it's nice and colourful. I mean, the box art doesn't exactly sell you the game by knowing what on earth it's about, but it looks pretty, and that's certainly one thing about this game. It's very pretty. I feel this one is going to fall by the wayside for people, and it's a shame if it does, because I feel that you should give it a go. That is Solenia by Pearl Games. Right, let's move on to a beast of a game now. Big Euro, and this is heavy. Oh god, this is going to be painful. So, look at this. Cerebria, and this is complete with a new insert as well, which will be interesting to see how well it does vertically after I just picked that up. But I was thinking, do I need to do a full review on this? But the problem is that this is a game that's hard to get to the table because it's long. It's a good 2 to 3 hour game plus or something. It's very involved, there's a lot of rules, but man is it really cool. This is one of my favourites from last year. It is a heavy Euro game, and if anybody tries to tell you this is not a heavy Euro game, then I'm sorry. Just no, okay? If you think this is not heavy, then what games do you play? Because this is easily heavy. There's a lot to think about in this game. But Cerebria is kind of like, I always like to call it the board game version of Inside Out, the Pixar movie. You are basically playing in teams. It's primarily a 4-player game, but you can tweak it. And you have 2 teams of 2. One side playing for bliss, one side playing for gloom. So the positive and the negative emotions. It's not good or evil per se. I mean, we all know from these sort of movies and just life in general that you need a balance of all emotions. But the idea is that you're in this land of Cerebria, and the different sides of the emotions are vying for dominance. And so you are moving these spirit figures on the map, and I'm talking from a Kickstarter perspective here. If you've got the retailer version, you'll have standees and maybe some other lighter components, like a different insert in that, but for the most part, there's not a huge amount of difference between the retail and the Kickstarter, apart from maybe having expansions built in. And with this one is that you move your figures around to perform actions. You're playing emotion cards in the different realms on this board, and with those emotions, they trigger off special powers. You can increase their intensity, as it's called, and you're basically doing an area control game. You're trying to set yourself up in such a way to complete these little mini objectives as the game progresses, both public and secret. And they usually are like, control so many realms, or control more than your opponent in this, have more than this than your opponent. It's basically having majority of something compared to your opponent. And the scoring happens at random times because, well, not random, I mean, you trigger them, but you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. You have willpower as a resource from these different wells in the middle of the board, and you drain from that pool in order to replenish yourself. But when one becomes empty, the scoring triggers, and it's a case of when do you want it to trigger? Do you want it to trigger now, or are you not quite ready yet? It's a very tight back and forth between players, but man, there's a lot to think about. You got to think, all right, do I want that emotion there? What are they going to do? How can I get control of this realm? He's just blocked me with this emotion. Do I level up this emotion? Do I put a new one down? Shall we abandon that altogether? And there's a good amount of cooperative nature between your teammate. Obviously, your opponents can hear what you're coming up with, but you have to cooperate. You cannot be a lone ranger in this. So there really was a good sense of engagement and team play in this. Now, it's no word of a lie that this thing just looks gorgeous. I mean, forget whether you've got the painted figurines like I have, which, to be fair, look amazing anyway. I mean, if you've got the Kickstarter version of this, lovely. But even without that, just the retail version, oh my god, this is pretty. This is one of the prettiest games that came out in 2018. It's gorgeous. I swear the people drawing this game must have been partially high, because, not only does it look good, but you look at the personifications of the emotions and the upgraded versions of them, and it's just like, I don't know what you were on, but this looks weird, it's surreal, and I love it. Such a good looking game. But it's also just a wonderfully thematic Euro. I mean, granted, it's difficult to say if it's thematic because you're dealing with emotions in a fictional world, but everything just sort of jumps out. You know that the designers took time to integrate this emotion theme, and certainly the different emotions that you play kind of work with the special powers that they give you. And it just brings back so many memories of that film, Inside Out, with how, you can't have too much happy, you need a bit of sad and everything. And by the way, if you've not seen Inside Out, shame on you, and go watch it. It's fantastic. Bing bong. But it's just a beautiful package. Now, I said it's primarily 2 versus 2. You can play this with a solo mode. I don't know if I think it's separate expansions that give you this, unless you got the Kickstarter version. But, there's a solo mode that you can get for this, which is involved, but it's a really cool one. David Turksey had a hand in it. And you can also play with Shaper rules, which basically means that rather than being in a team of 2, you control 2 by yourself. It's more involved, but you can tweak it so that you only control 1 spirit, but every player has to do that. And you can even do 2 versus 1 in such respect. So it's basically just tweaks to the rules in order to change the player count. But 2 versus 2 is the most common one. There is an expansion for this called Forces of Balance, I think, which was built into the Kickstarter version, but you can get it separately, which introduces a third faction. And if you play this third faction, then you're trying to keep the two the Bliss and Gloom factions in balance with each other, so not one person gets dominance. It's harder to play them, but my god, is it interesting. And this also allows you to play a good 3-player mode where each person controls a faction by themselves. It's, again, 3's the sweet spot, broken record, but it works so well. It also does allow you to play this with 5 or 6 players. Do not do that under any circumstances. So if you thought this game was long enough with 3 or 4 players, you try doing it with 5 or 6. No, not going to happen. But I can't really do a full review of this because it's difficult to get enough plays of it. I've only played it like a couple of times now, and, like I say, 5 and 6 players I've not played, but 4 takes you a good 2 to 3 hours. Do you really think 5 and 6 is going to take you any less? So, you know, it's things like that. But I have played the solo mode. It is a really cool solo mode, you know. Not quite as good as, say, the Chronobot from Anachrony, another one of his works, but certainly a solid one at that. But I know I can't go into too much detail with this because there's a lot to talk about with this game, but just know that this is a heavy thematic Euro, definitely involved, but definitely feels very different from a lot of games you've played and looks drop dead gorgeous on the table. You need to be committed to this rules-wise because it is a bit of a learning curve, but the rulebook is good, you know, videos on this are pretty solid as well, and definitely worth checking out. But it's going to be quite an investment to get it. So maybe a try before you buy if you're worried about the value, but honestly, this was one of my favourites from last year, and if it's going to take 3 hours to play a game, you know me, if it's going to be a long one, it's got to be one that I adore. So, Cerebria, great heavy thematic Euro. Okay, 2 more before I wrap up this anthology, and we're going to go into expansions. First off, we're going to start off with a pretty simple expansion to talk about, really. There's only so much I can say about it, and that is 7 Wonders Armada. 7 Wonders Armada is the newest expansion to one of my favourite drafting games ever. I love this game. I love 7 Wonders and 7 Wonders Duel. This one is another expansion where it introduces a fleet of ships for each player, differentiated by the colours red, yellow, blue and green to correspond with the cards. And it's a pretty simple include. As well as some additional cards that you throw into the main decks, essentially what happens is on your board that each person has that's slightly different, if you build a particular wonder stage or if you build a card of that colour, if you can afford the extra construction cost as printed on the board, you shift your ship forward. And depending on which column it is, which colour, it gets you other bonuses. Red gets you naval strength, which is a separate combat phase at the end of a round. That affects everybody, not just your neighbours, which is really cool. Bit more interaction. The yellow gets you more money, but also makes people lose money. The green lets you visit these island cards, which are kind of like, a bit like playing with leaders in a sense. You know, you're essentially looking through them and saying, "Oh, that one gives me victory points. That one gives me combat. That one gives me something else. You know, what do I want?" It's cool, interesting abilities. And blue just gives you straight up victory points. But I love the way that this is an easy include in 7 Wonders. You could teach this with the base game alone to new players, and I don't think it would overwhelm them too much. You don't even have to concentrate that much on the board. You could just ignore it and just carry on with normal base 7 Wonders. You know, if you're going to afford the construction cost, there's no reason why you wouldn't shift your ship forward, but if it's going to cost you money or you're going to lose a lot in order to do it, is it worth it? You know, it's entirely up to you. But the rules to this are not complicated, and I like the new things that it throws in, like the naval battles. Now, as well as the ground combat, there are some rule differentiations you have to kind of get into your head to differentiate between ground and naval, but ground combat was always just with your neighbours. Naval affects everybody, so everybody compares their naval strength, and you get points and negative points based on where you rank. It's a neat way to just add a little bit more interaction between all the players and not just have only your 2 neighbours being relevant in the whole game. But one thing that this does introduce is there are some rules in the book that recommend that you don't play more than 2 expansions at a time with 7 Wonders. I know there are some people out there that like to play with everything. Like, I want leaders, I want cities, I want Babel, everything, and this all in the same game. You want to do that, that's fine, but I recommend that if you don't want to make this unwieldy, just stick to 2. Typically, I like playing with leaders and cities. I'm one of the few people in the world that likes the Tower of Babel, it seems, but I like playing with the Tower and maybe leaders, you know, and that sort of combination, or leaders, cities with the Babel Tower as like the most complicated way I'll play it. Not the biggest fan of the projects from that expansion, but this one I find is a solid include for just the base set. You could make this the first one you get, and it works just fine. I don't think from what I've seen in it, you don't need leaders or cities to play this because it doesn't reference the black cards and it doesn't reference the leaders either. And there's no bonus leaders or black cards in this to say, oh yeah, if you move your ship forward, you get this black card bonus. No, so you can play this without leaders and cities. Great. And I think it just makes for a way to make the base set a little bit more interesting because as much as I love 7 Wonders, I'm kind of burnt out on just playing the base set on its own. It's like, well, there's not very many interesting cards. I've seen these all before, whatever. But I love playing with leaders and cities to mix things up a bit. This provides me with a way to play the base set, but still mix it up a little bit with this expansion on its own. It works well with Legions and Cities, but now I can say, right, we're going to teach this to maybe one new player who's played the other games before. I don't recommend teaching this to a brand new player per se, but someone who's only just new to Seven Wonders could handle this pretty well, especially if they played other drafting games. And you just throw in base set and Armada, and it works very well. So I don't think this one sort of blows my head off or anything like that. But if you like Seven Wonders, this is a good expansion, an easy include, although if, like me, you had an insert for the original Seven Wonders and you were strapped for space, be prepared to have this box on the side. Although this box is shaped in a nice way that it does allow you to put a lot of the boards in there. So like the Wonder boards, the Armada boards and other things like that. You can put a lot of those in this box and keep the cards in the other one. So it gives you an interesting way to store the game, but yeah, don't think that you're going to get this and all the other Seven Wonders stuff in the main box anymore. It's just not going to happen. But Seven Wonders Armada, solid expansion to an already fantastic game. And finally, before I wrap up this video, Mansions of Madness. It's no secret that I love this game. This is one of my favourite Cthulhu games that there is. It's a great thematic, atmospheric game, and it's one of the best app implementations you can get, whether it's on iPad or Android. It works so well. I even have a TV on the wall that I like to put the image on if I'm playing with groups or even just by myself, really. And it just broadcasts the sound out of a little speaker, and it just, oh yeah, love it to bits. The expansions are not cheap, and storing this game is quite hard. I've got a sort of weird crate up there that I put a lot of stuff in, but I still need the base box to hold a lot of the miniatures. There's just so much to store now as I've been getting every expansion. But which ones are best to get? Kind of depends on what you want from the scenarios mainly, because they all give you new investigators, they give you new cards, they give you new spells and stuff, and that's kind of expected. What really sets them off is whether they introduce a new mechanic that's particularly great. From the get-go, they introduce some new mechanics, but they're pretty minor, so that's not really a focal point. What's really a focal point is the scenarios themselves. How many do they give, and are they interesting? Well, previously, Streets of Arkham was my favourite. This one had you suddenly venturing outside a lot more. The original did that as well, but Streets of Arkham had more outdoor locations. You visited other shops and diners in one of them, and it shifted to other locations more, and it was my previous favourite. I mean, there have been some good ones along the way, but that one just sung to me like, this is my favourite expansion. That might have just changed. This Horrific Journeys expansion is amazing. This is a brilliant expansion. And, whether I would get it over Streets of Arkham, I don't know. I think I probably might. It's a bit more of a difficulty curve, I think, than the other ones, but it's not for the extra mechanics or the extra stuff in it. I mean, yeah, you get more cards, more investigators, whatever, more monsters. But there's two main things about this. Firstly, there's a way to twist up one of the scenarios with agendas. It adds a traitor mechanic to what is already a co-op experience, where one of you might actually be siding with the Ancient Ones. It's sadly something I'm not going to use very often, because you need at least 3 players in order to use it, and I don't often play Mansions of Madness in any way other than solo. But for those of you who like to play it with a group of players, this throws in a nice way to twist up the game. Unfortunately, it seems that it only really works with one of the scenarios in this lot, so you're kind of restricted on when you can use it. I don't think you can throw it into every single scenario that you've got, which is a bit of a shame. It's a minor addition to the game. I think it does throw in a nice cool thing, but don't buy this expansion purely for that. What you want to buy this expansion for, though, is the 3 scenarios that you get in it. They are really cool scenarios, and the main thing is that thematically they work so well, partially because of the locations that you're at. We've been used to going to a university, a house 2, hotel, building here, building this, or Dirty Street 1, Dirty Street 3, maybe a rural location every now and again. They get a little samey over time. Here, though, you've got 3 very distinguished scenarios and very distinct locations. One of them is done on a speeding train throughout the countryside. One of your companions has vanished and you've got to figure out what's going on and deal with everything else that's happening on the train. So you've got the locomotive carriages, it's quite claustrophobic, and obviously a train is car in one big straight line, so you can't just do a loop-the-loop around the various map locations. Really cool setting. Arkham Horror, the LCG, had one in there, the Great Train Express, or Essex County Express or something. It's one of my favourite scenarios in the whole selection of cycle packs, and it was a similar scenario. The second one is an airship, like a Zeppelin thing. There's been a murder and you're trying to solve how this murder occurred and what else is going on. And again, it's on an airship location. And the third one, which is the one that the traitor mechanic blends with, is on a cruise ship. So you're on a cruise ship and there's all sorts of things going on. This is probably the more complex of the three, I think. And, again, it's a cruise ship. So 3 very distinct locations: an airship, a train, and a cruise ship. If you were getting bored with just streets and buildings before, this throws in some very unique styles of scenarios and locations. I mean, they all play in a kind of whodunit fashion, but, the train introduces concepts with the way the map's laid out that you're not going to see in, say, the cruise ship or even the airship, and certainly not with the stuff that you've got in original packs. Of course, the elements that you get here, like spells and investigators and monsters, will feed into the older scenarios via the app like they normally do. But there's not much else to say about it, really. If you enjoy Mansions of Madness and you already have a bunch of expansions, there is no reason why you haven't got this one already. I don't have the box to show you because I've kind of put it all in a case and thrown that box away by now. But thematically, it's an auto-buy. They're not cheap, I admit. But I think if you're trying to prioritise which expansions you really want, Horrific Journeys and Streets of Arkham, I think they're the most expensive expansions, which, is kind of weird to talk about value when you're suggesting the 2 expensive ones are the ones you get. But 3 cool scenarios in both of them, with more spells and investigators and stuff like that, and just twisting up the locations more. Streets brought you outside more often. Here now brings you on 3 different modes of transportation, and they just feel very different, very thematic, very atmospheric, and it's definitely a great expansion. So, it's not losing its legs anytime soon, and I am more than up for more scenarios and Mansions of Madness, because it will take me forever to go through them all in, lots of detail. I may have played most of the scenarios I've played the once. I want to do repeat plays, but it's not an easy game to get to the table. But every time I do, it's just, so much fun, this game, and this is another solid expansion for it. So that's Horrific Journeys. And, that's it for me for this video. Yes, my first video of Season 3, a big anthology of a lot of games that I just needed to catch up with. There'll be a single review coming soon, the Gugon, which is a new Euro game. That should be a good laugh. And there's a top 10 list coming eventually, my top 10 games from 2008. We've just had my top 10 of 2018. Let's go back 10 years and see what games featured when things were a little bit different. So that's it from me. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel, check me out on my various other platforms, and other than that, just always remember, it's only a game. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video.